Chapter 5 True Messengers. If there was a religion that existed, that benefited humankind and created a more peaceful, equal, caring world, then we would support it. But there is not. We understand how important spiritual beliefs are to the people living on earth. Humans are driven to understand why they live upon earth. Even more important to each of us, everyone wants to know, what is my purpose for living? From our experience, we know that humans need religion as much as they need air to breathe and food to eat. Religion provides a person with food for the soul because it satisfies the human longing to understand one's purpose in life. Mortals do not know that each of us is an independent, highly advanced human being, connected to the earth experience as a way of enhancing our otherwise perfect eternal existence. This is the cause of the God presence, a feeling that we are not alone and that someone greater than our mortal self is aware of us. It's this actual energy, this physical connection that cannot be denied, that causes mortals to seek to understand what it is. When they can't find the answers themselves, they seek for someone who can provide them. If knowing these things was possible for a normal person, then throughout history, with all the thinking and learning going on, somehow, somewhere, someone would have come up with the right answers. But no one ever did, at least not from all the knowledge ever learned by a normal functioning mortal brain. Every religion attempts to answer these important questions. Unfortunately, false messengers try, but they can't answer the questions. As we explained earlier, when the answers do not come from within oneself, no matter how sincere and humble the person is who's asking, the sincere seeker looks for someone outside of their own consciousness to bring them the answers. I am looking for messengers. Once open to the possibility that another human might have the answers, the seeker of truth is presented with various ministers of knowledge who provide answers made up of the philosophies of men mingled with Scripture. Our goals have always centered around fighting these purveyors of injustice without dominating them, but using them for our own purpose. When we couldn't find any of these merchants of knowledge to whom the people looked to for the answers, who were worthy of cause, we made our own messenger. Throughout history, we have selected a few to represent us in our cause. We call this representative a true messenger. Whenever we saw the need, we asked a true messenger to introduce new concepts of belief to the people among whom this messenger lived. It was our hope that upon so doing, the people might begin to support a religious movement that was good for humanity. It's important here to understand that we cannot try to set up the right form of religion unless we have a person who is not only willing to help us, but will sacrifice a normal life in the process. As we explained in a previous chapter, unless a person has experienced a brain transfiguration like all the other members of the real Illuminati, we will not reveal ourselves to him or her. Once the right circumstances exist where a new form of religious thought is possible, we need a true messenger to help us do our best to influence the right form. Free will is the most important part of being alive and living upon earth. No one can be forced to think in any certain way. A person must choose of their own free will to think whatever it is that the person wants to think. Certain things are happening throughout the earth in different cultures and communities. When we have found a culture where the people have opened up their minds sufficiently, usually from the societal circumstances and current happenings of that particular time and place, we intercede behind the scenes. We travel throughout the earth looking for such times and places. But even if we find the right situation, without a person who is willing to become our true messenger, we cannot proceed in our attempts. It wasn't until the Greek civilization had developed to a point where the people began to think outside of the limited box of traditional prejudices in which they had existed for many years that we made the decision to travel to that area of the world to see what we could do. Near Athens, Greece, we found the man who the world would come to know as the ancient philosopher Socrates. Socrates was the first to teach his students that those who tell the stories also rule the world. We recruited him to be one of our true messengers. At that particular time, it was not our attempt to set up any type of religion. It was our hope during the time of Socrates that we could influence people to think outside of the stories and traditions that gave the few power over the many. What we asked Socrates to do was outside of religious belief. Our intent has always been to get people to use their own brain, their own intuition, according to their own free will, to understand whatever it is that their true self needs them to know. Keep in mind that each mortal is a dream reflection of their true self. If it is not in your true self's best interest that you know certain things while living a mortal existence on earth, then no one has the right to force you to know something you shouldn't. Why? Because if you discover something that your true self did not want you to discover, the discovery might mess up the way your true self wants your mortal life to play out on earth. The problem with religion has always been that other people are telling you what you should do, how you should do it, what you should think about, and what conclusions you should make from your life experiences. Through Socrates, we were able to introduce a way that we hope would get people to discover things about themselves that would benefit their personal desires. Socrates did not tell anyone what they should do, how they should do it, what they should think, or what conclusions they should make about their personal life. Each individual is different. Each individual has his or her own different needs. By asking each person personal questions and providing the appropriate answers to their personal questions, it was our desire to stimulate a person's brain to answer their own questions. This pedagogy, this method of teaching, would become known as the Socratic method. If this method had been successful, there would have been no need for us to try to get people to think on their own by using religion. We had little success in Greek society at that time. The power of false messengers who claimed to have the answers that fit for everyone, i.e., their religious leaders, was too overwhelming for the average person. Our efforts through Socrates failed. We had cautioned Socrates about leaving any of his teachings in written form, knowing that if something is written, then it can be rewritten. According to our counsel, Socrates left no writings. Unfortunately, some of his students misinterpreted Socrates' teachings in the presentation of their own. His few students found that they received value, prestige, and money in the community when they presented information that was politically and socially correct. So they simply took some of Socrates' information that wasn't politically and socially correct and made it so. Whatever they learned from our true messenger, they changed it to conform to what their community wanted to hear, for which they were compensated handsomely. A few hundred years after Socrates lived, we were once again afforded the opportunity to introduce a new way of thinking, which countered the traditions and stories that gave the few power over the many. Once the Romans had assimilated the Greeks into their own community, first a republic, then an empire, freedom of thought among the masses increased. Ancient stories had developed into religions of every kind. The Greek stories were precursors of the Roman stories. The Greeks developed their religions and the Romans developed theirs. These religions developed among the upper classes of economic division. Greek and Roman gods favored the worldly successful by convincing the lower classes that the means of worldly success was not earned through hard work, but given as a blessing by the gods. This was very advantageous to the few in the upper class. The stories told about the gods choosing certain individuals as their mortal representatives helped the few, especially the physically weaker men, control the masses of the lower classes. Weaker Greek men told stories that always included the idea that the gods would choose men, that even though these men might be weak, the gods would provide them with a special supernatural physical power that made them stronger than any other man. The people were convinced that a small in stature, weaker male, or in other cases a female, if chosen by the gods, was given supernatural power. For one example, priesthood power. This concept concept of God choosing a weak mortal and giving him or her supernatural powers had worked well for the ancient Egyptian and Sumerian leaders. The Romans learned from these past successes. The religious leaders could appoint a child to be the choice of the gods, and the people would accept it. A child was much easier to control by the powers behind the scenes. What the people failed to see was how the child was being used by the real powers, the weaker men, who wanted the support and protection of the people. Knowing how important religion is to a person who is searching for the meaning of life, and knowing how opportunistic people take advantage of this, we did everything we knew how to do in order to set up the perfect religion upon earth. Around 600 BCE, we wrote a religiously based dissertation, scripture, to confront what the ancient Hebrew culture had presented to their people about their culture's history. We asked our true messenger to introduce it. Modern religious documents call him Isaiah. Modern scholars, however, have many questions about the actual existence of Isaiah. Where did Isaiah actually come from? Who was his father, Amos? And why wasn't Isaiah's name associated with the priest like other major prophets were? There is much more information included in Jewish history about the other prophets' interactions with the people than there is about Isaiah. Jewish historians were reluctant to include too much information about Isaiah. And once the real truth is known about him, the reason behind Jewish reluctance in not providing more information will begin to make sense. Our messenger's true name was not Isaiah. It was Belzerach. His father's birth name was not Amos. To make the text of his prophecies more compatible to and supportive of the Jewish faith, editors changed Belzerach's name to Isaiah, which interpreted means God's salvation. They assigned the name Amos or Amos to his father, which interpreted means burdened or troubled. As we uncover the true facts about Isaiah, you will discover the real truth and finally understand why literary license was freely used to make these changes and present them as a factual historical account. Simply put, Jewish historians were not very proud of Belzerach's father and were embarrassed of the way Isaiah was treated by the leaders and the people of the kingdom of Judah. In the scripture we wrote, we called out this secret combination of political, philosophical, and business leaders who didn't think anyone was watching them. Quote, their works were in the dark, unquote. We called our movement, quote, a marvelous work and a wonder, unquote. We explained that religious people were claiming to be good and honorable in the way that they were worshiping and honoring their God, but were actually hypocrites in the way that they acted towards each other. Like religion often does, people say good things with their mouth and with their lips, but their actions are not good because, quote, their fear of God is taught by the precepts of men, unquote, and they do what their religious leaders tell them to do. What we wrote then has been translated into the English language in modern times. Quote, wherefore the Lord said, forasmuch as this people draw near unto me with their mouth and with their lips do honor me, but have removed their heart far from me, and their fear toward me is taught by the precept of men. Therefore, behold, I will proceed to do a marvelous work among this people, even a marvelous work and a wonder. For the wisdom of their wise men shall perish, and the understanding of their prudent men shall be hid. Woe unto them that seek deep to hide their counsel from the Lord, and their works are in the dark. And they say, who seeth us, and who knoweth us? Surely your turning of things upside down shall be esteemed as the potter's clay. For shall the work say of him that made it, he made me not? Or shall the thing framed say of him that framed it, he had no understanding? Unquote. Our work, a marvelous work and a wonder, is to bring to light the things that the combination of political, religious, and economic powers do in the dark. Once we reveal what they have done throughout history and what they do today, these purveyors of injustice will no longer be able to say, it wasn't me who did that. Perhaps false messengers might say that they didn't understand that what they are doing is bad for humanity. Quote, shall a thing say of him that framed it, he had no understanding? Unquote. Our intent is to make sure that the politicians, religious leaders, and economic leaders understand perfectly what they have framed. And what they have framed is the places of worship where the masses go to hear God, to hear their religion, is their greatest machination. We wrote the book of Isaiah as a counteroffensive to the things that were written in the Pentateuch. Note, the ancient Hebrew tribal leaders commissioned Greek writers to take their oral histories and transpose them into a written word. This is where the Pentateuch, which means the first 5 books of Moses, originated, and the reason it was first written in Greek. If read correctly and honestly, the book of Isaiah promotes the idea that all religion is corrupt and that a person should reject men as their authority. Quote, "Cease ye from man whose breath is in his nostrils, for wherein is he to be accounted of?" Unquote. The original book of Isaiah was our attempt to persuade people to look only to God for guidance. In other words, we were trying to get people to think for themselves. At the time, people were convinced that there was a supernatural force outside of their own mind that would guide them if they relied on it. Knowing that this force was actually a person's own mind, we presented the idea that a person should reject everything that they did not directly receive from God in their own mind. While we had their attention, we explained the importance of taking care of the poor and needy, making this more important than any religious ritual or belief. Consider reading Isaiah chapter 1. Unfortunately, as is the case, anything that is written can be rewritten. Later Jewish scribes interpolated many things into our book of Isaiah that put the quote-unquote house of Israel above all other houses and made the Jews their God's chosen people. This was not part of nor intended by our original writings for Isaiah. These parts were added later. We knew how easy it was to change the written word, especially in ancient times when there were few copies and usually only one original manuscript. But we have the original manuscript of the book of Isaiah in our possession today. We also have a copy that we made of the original Greek Pentateuch. It is to these documents that we currently have our true messenger refer in the presentation of our message to the modern world.